Recently, Russia's enacted a 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine running from the 8th to the 10th, in celebration of the 80th anniversary of Allied victory in Europe in World War II. Leaders such as Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and the Brazilian and Serbian presidents Luiz Inácio da Silva and Alexander Vučić have attended the celebrations. What if Ukraine were to violate this treaty in Russia's eyes and eliminate 4 world leaders simultaneously with a drone strike? First of all, why would Ukraine do this? They're the closest to peace with Russia since before February 2022 and have signed a multi-billion minerals deal with the United States in exchange for future military aid. Hopefully, this will pressure Russia to agree to peace, but Ukraine will certainly lose land. The primary reason I see for this to happen is Zelensky attempting to maintain power and create a legacy. He has only been president for this long because of the activation of martial law by Russia's invasion. He is the Churchill of Ukraine and knows he will lose relevance in the political climate of the post-war period. This attack would be a last-ditch effort to send the governments of Russia and China into disarray. Cutting off a hydra's head will only cause more to grow, unless you have a torch to cauterize the wound. Zelensky does not have this torch. This video kind of dropped a little late, as Xi Jinping has already departed Ukraine, so at least you'll rest assured this won't happen. As the climax of the victory parade is reached, a loud explosion rings out across Moscow. A drone strike similar to the alleged Ukrainian attack on the Kremlin on May 3rd, 2023, hits the stage overlooking the parade and instantly kills multiple world leaders. International backlash is instant, and the countries who were stalling on their leaders scrambled to put someone else in office. A new Chinese leader is chosen with similar views to Xi, and not much changes. Mikhail Mishustin, the current Russian prime minister, is elected as president. According to the international news, Zelensky said, "We cannot be responsible for what happens on the territory of the Russian Federation." That's kind of really ominous. Additionally, former Russian President Medvedev said that Zelensky understands that in the event of a real provocation on Victory Day, nobody will be able to guarantee that Kiev will lift the sea May 10th. Russia uses the attack and its timing to strengthen their prior claims of Ukraine being a Nazi sympathizer. Within an hour, a nuclear missile hits Kiev, killing 400,000 civilians. By now, Zelensky and the other heads of government have evacuated to Poland. Nuclear strikes also hit several major troop groupings and result in tens of thousands of military personnel dying. Ukraine morale and manpower is severely weakened and Russian troops flood westward. A major offensive spearheads towards Odessa, and with their defenses weakened by the nearby nuclear strike, the city is surrounded on the north side. An amphibious invasion into the north of the exclave Bessarabia completely surrounds the city, and it is taken in 2 weeks. In the east, a large area is surrounded and eventually captured. Meanwhile, European leaders argue on what to do. NATO cites the threat of nuclear fallout as a reason to send military aid in the form of hundreds of thousands of soldiers to Ukraine. This is the largest mobilization of European troops since World War II. The nuclear strikes of Kiev and its surrounding defenses lead to the Dnieper River being crossed easily and Kiev to be taken in days, with the Russians full forcing forwards. Soon, all land east of the Dnieper falls to Russia, and a consolidated red curtain begins to descend over western Ukraine. Russian and NATO troops meet, fighting from the borders of Moldova to Belarus. A year of brutal fighting results in NATO only being pushed back slightly. The world's longest DMZ is set up in western Ukraine. East Ukraine is incorporated into Russia, while Ukraine in the west maintains its sovereignty. Most of the Ukrainian population despise Zelensky for his reckless attack, and he goes into political exile after losing the next election. As the world recovers from the shock of the Ukraine war, China and Russia grow closer together in an alliance against NATO. Mishustin supports larger corporations over smaller ones and places restrictions on those remaining. They are required to produce what the government wants and soon fall completely under governmental control. The only party allowed is the Communist Party. Meanwhile, China consolidates economic control in Africa, with the continent becoming the focal point of what some call the Second Cold War. China supports the creation of the East African Federation, a proposed union between Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, Burundi, South Sudan, Somalia, and the DRC. By 2030, the first 5 nations found the EAF, with the latter 3 not being included due to ongoing conflicts. The DRC is caused by Rwanda's own M23 insurgent group. The nation serves as China's biggest outpost for growth in Africa. Meanwhile, a coup overthrows Egypt's government and an economic alliance is decided between them and China. In exchange for economic stabilization of regions other than the Nile and military aid, China gets a percent of the Suez Canal's taxation. In Sudan, the civil war escalates as Darfur rebels grow in numbers and South Sudan gains more land, with support from the EAF and China. Egypt joins the war, claiming it as a resolution to the Halib Triangle border dispute. South Sudan spearheads towards the Sudanese capital of Khartoum, while Egypt snakes its way along the Nile River and Red Sea coast. Sudan is divided between South Sudan in the north, Darfur in the west, and Egypt in the north and east. With the summary of the Sudanese Civil War, South Sudan is admitted into the EAF, along with Darfur. On the other side of the planet, China invades Taiwan in 2028. They manage to break Taiwan's naval defenses in the south and begin to invade the island, sending boats from both directions in the largest naval battle in history, crippling the western fleet of Taiwan. Before the smaller eastern fleet can arrive, China shuttles hundreds of thousands of troops onto the island. The southern half of the island is targeted first, with a second invasion landing in central Taiwan and converging on the city of Tainan. From then on, it is a brutal climb toward Taipei, but despite U.S. aid, Taiwan is annexed eventually and is cracked down upon brutally. The Europeans do not help Taiwan, as they are being invaded by Russia. In the past 4 years, Eastern Europe has been rapidly mobilizing their military, with a defensive line spanning from the Arctic to the Aegean. 3 major incursions are enacted by Russia, being Romania, Ukraine, and the Baltics. Despite preparation, the Baltics are folded, with a joint invasion by Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. Finland is invaded amphibiously and landly, but Russia makes little ground there. Although the Baltic invasion was resoundingly successful, the Polish military might barrels through Kaliningrad and into Lithuania. The Romanian incursion spearheads westwards, capturing Bucharest and struggling towards Serbia. Serbia sends troops to Romania to aid Russia and takes this as a chance to reclaim Kosovo. With Serbian aid, the incursion is slightly more stable. Now, the Russians' only chance to victory is to close it on Ukraine or face defeat in the process. Russia has pushed back on the Ukrainian front, with combined NATO rebel forces forcing them nearly to Kiev. Russia pulls out of Finland entirely, fully focusing its northern forces against Poland. Poland, though, makes good progress through Belarus and worries Russia about a surrounded Baltic front. With their spiraling victory or death strategy combined with egotistical generals, Russia continues to support the Polish invasion, with the brute force of the operation overwhelming Poland and finally causing NATO troops in Ukraine to be surrounded. Unfortunately, by this point, Kiev is on the verge of European capture. Russian troops in Romania and Poland brutally batter European troops. Russian troops pushed to the Dnieper nearly gain back their former borders. The whole thing comes crashing down on Russia, with Poland diverting their Belarusian front to Ukraine, the Balkans finally getting their shit together. Additionally, a combined Greece-Turkey initiative amphibiously invades Bessarabia. Russian forces are brutally destroyed at Lviv, the exiled capital of Ukraine. The Baltics are completely liberated, and the troops cross the Dnieper River. Ukraine is liberated within months, and the Belarusian government is overthrown and replaced by a democratic republic. Serbia is easily invaded and forced to recognize Kosovo. Even without U.S. aid, Europe bodies Russia. Russian defeat only causes their return to communism to accelerate. By 2035, private property is eliminated. By 2040, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan join Russia in the reformation of the USSR. The USSR remains isolationist, except with limited Chinese partnership. Although losing the Second Ukraine War, they have become a successful communist state, using AI to reduce the work of humans and dabbling with energy. As the time of Earth oil deposits running out is nigh, countries scramble for resources that will be necessary for the second half of the 21st century. China, however, becomes a staunchly capitalist state, seemingly the only way to establish itself in an economic war for the world. By 2050, China establishes the first lunar base. Around 2045, China invades North Korea to overthrow the government as they want to industrialize the nation's economy and know supporting the Kim dynasty would only cause an increased military budget. They want Korea, when it is time to become united, to be a stable and equal nation. South Korea takes advantage of this, seeing China's increasing influence and knowing that this is the best chance they'll ever get at independence. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the DMZ are killed in one of the bloodiest battles ever. South Korean forces are met with the surprise of China as they cross the DMZ in the west, with China forcing them back towards Seoul. Despite Japanese and American aid, Seoul is captured and South Korea is forced to the sea. The Koreas unite under a careful Chinese eye with a joint government being chosen. By 2045, Ethiopia invades Eritrea for coastal access. They initially split the country down the middle, with the southern region falling under Ethiopian control easily. From then on, they slowly close in on Eritrea from the west and south, capturing Massawa and forcing their surrender and annexation. By 2045, Somali-funded rebels in southeast Ethiopia initiate a war between the two. Somaliland is granted full independence as an Ethiopian ally, with Puntland getting it as well. Ethiopia and later Somaliland become the two newest members of the EAF. Chinese allies cover Africa, with the EAF, South Africa, and Nigeria working to reach the most isolated regions that have not yet fallen under their influence. Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Laos, and Indonesia are some Asian nations that prefer China, although India and China are at odds in a regional economic war. Australia has equal relations with Europe and China by this point. Brazil, especially after the president's death in the 2025 Moscow drone disaster, has fallen under China's thumb. Meanwhile, Europe grows more isolationist, with seemingly every nation except the US and India letting China peacefully conquer the world. Speaking of the US, they are increasingly worried about oil, which the modern depletion date is predicted as soon as 2052. Europe and Russia are already established as using alternative energy sources and looking to new ones such as fusion, which is still far away in the year 2050. China has strong ties with the Middle East, and bases along the Red Sea will help them in the upcoming oil crisis. A desperate United States forms a desperate plan. On the 50th anniversary of 9/11, the U.S. government releases evidence of Saudi involvement in the terrorist attacks. General interest in the topic is low, as the world is 3 generations removed from the event. The U.S. declares war on Saudi Arabia and issues a draft. Similar protests are produced by this as by the Vietnam War, and this escalates political tensions in a country that is increasingly dependent on a two-party system. With Saudi Arabia having seized Yemen and relations between them and Israel strengthening in recent years, Saudi Arabia has a stronger defense than it has ever had. The U.S. also declares war on the UAE. Although a decade of landings bombard the Arabian coast, little ground is made, and this conflict only accelerates the draining of oil, with drone strikes destroying much of the oil industry. America is humiliated, and soldiers come home to a nation more divided than ever. With China rigging the 2060 presidential election, a reckless and extreme candidate is the straw that broke the camel's back. The USA falls into civil war. Rebellious groups emerge in California, Texas, the South, the East, the Midwest, and the Great Plains, with the United States government constantly losing ground and being driven to the Northeast. Canada fights rebel groups in Northern America, while a Chinese ally Mexico invades its former territories in the Four Corners. Texas and the South duke it out, while an extremist left faction in the Midwest takes up the mantle of communism. Alaska joins Canada in fear of a Chinese invasion, while Quebec takes advantage of the turmoil and gains independence from Canada, becoming a Chinese ally soon after. Most of the world is not affected much by the collapse of America, as it would have been in 2025. Europe has slight consequences, and the only hard-hit areas are Japan and South America. In this world, the 21st century is defined by China. Thanks for watching. This video was really fun to make. If you have any suggestions, write it in the comments section. Do you think this is how the scenario would have occurred? And if not, share what you think would have happened. Please tell me if there are any mistakes. I love history and I'm trying to learn more with this channel. See you in the next one. This video kind of dropped a little late. This video kind of dropped a little late. This video kind of dropped a little